So, welcome into the Hot Shop. We have a visiting artist, of course, and I'm sure you saw his name as you walked in, but his name is Nick, and he's over on the left side of the Hot Shop, Nick Mount. See what color shirt he's wearing today. Yeah, he's wearing a white t-shirt. So we are working on a piece that he's actually sketched on the floor, luckily, right here in the center of the Hot Shop. And we, of course, have a bunch of pieces that we've made over the past few days already laid out. Kind of gives you a good idea of what the patterning might look like. I've been working with a lot of the, specifically like that checkerboard pattern. And I find it really interesting the way that they get this pattern. If you haven't seen it yet, we have all these little squares of colored glass on the pedestal over here, which are laid out on these trays side by side to create those patterns in the first place. And yes, they start this small and they're able to expand to that size. So interesting. So we're just getting started on our next project. I think that we're starting with some smaller components, such as these side pieces here. Our visiting artist, Nick, he's going to be teaching a class at Pilchuck next week. And this is kind of a collaborative residency with Pilchuck. Sometimes we'll take artists in before or after their residency at Pilchuck, which again is a glass school 2 hours north of us. So he's going to be teaching a class about specifically, what was it? Kind of like putting a story behind the art, how to develop a story into art, vice versa. It's a what? So a lot of the people that come through here are already professional artists, and Nick Mount himself is definitely a professional artist. He's been working with glass for a very long time, and on top of that, everyone else on the floor, they're all professionals that work full-time at the Museum of Glass. And so they will help visiting artists that come through, because you always need a team to work on all of these various projects. It's hard to make glass on your own. Could I have our visiting artist slideshow briefly, please? Thank you. So for those who haven't seen this yet, there's a slideshow going on the screen of our visiting artist work. And I wanted to show off. We can skip this one in particular. I'll show Nick that one in a second. But we have a slideshow on the screen of some previously made work and some inspiration photos, basically some sketches for what we'll be working on during this residency. And this is the last day of Nick's residency here at the museum, so we're going to finish off whatever we can while we're here for this last day. Nick Mount himself, he's the one in the white t-shirt over on the left side of the hot shop. Just to point that out again. Everyone else on the floor, they work for the museum and they help visiting artists that come through. So this is their 9 to 5. They work on so many various projects. And I was explaining to those in the front that this is a residency before our visiting artist teaches a class at Pilchuck, which is a glass school 2 hours north. And this is a continuous or ongoing partnership that we have with Pilchuck Glass School. We'll take in resident artists from there either before or after their residency or class so that they can continue their line of work or maybe prepare for the line of work at Pilchuck. Thank you. And something interesting, we usually start our projects on the side benches and then we move to the center bench to finish it off. So that's why we've moved benches right here. We're going to continue to work on this piece right front and center. We already have our checkerboard pattern. I'm assuming this is going to become either the top half or the lower half of one of these pieces on the front table, which you guys could take a closer look at if you like. They're supposed to kind of represent heads, and then these forms on the side that are kind of like these right here are like headphones or earmuffs. Hey, welcome into the Hot Shop, you two. I just wanted to catch you guys up real quick on what we're working on. So, of course, we have visiting artist Nick Mount in the Hot Shop today. He's the one in the white t-shirt, kind of in the back there. And everyone else on the floor, they are our resident Hot Shop team. They work full-time at the museum. They'll help visiting artists that come through, just like today. And this is the last day of Nick's residency here at the museum for this residency. And we're seeing him work on specifically this form that he sketched on the ground out of chalk. This is something that we commonly do to kind of communicate to our team what we're going for, and we usually even make it to scale so we can get the measurements off of it. So that is the final piece right there. We have some finished pieces on the front table. If you'd like to take a closer look, feel free to. These were made over the past 5 days or so. Nick's residency started on Wednesday. And a lot of these pieces are being made in preparation for a class that Nick is going to be teaching at Pilchuck Glass School, 2 hours north of us in Stanwood, Washington. We have a glass school, and yeah, Nick's going to be teaching specifically in the Hot Shop and kind of on how to build narrative behind your pieces or build pieces based off of a narrative. So that's something really important to teach for art. Hey, welcome into the Hot Shop, you two. So we are working on the form that you see sketched out on the floor in chalk. I'm not sure if you guys had a chance to see that earlier when I was pointing it out, but this is designed by our visiting artist, Nick Mount, who's in the white t-shirt, standing beside the bench. And this is, of course, the upper half of the piece. Usually we'll start on just this top section, and we'll eventually finish this off, set it aside to keep it warm, and then work on the second section, and we can bring the two together. And this is why we have multiple benches to work at. It's nice to be able to work at a couple places at the same time, and then we can bring multiple components together. But we always have to keep the glass warm at about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Not like we can just set it aside at room temperature, just kind of sit it down. We have to let it cool down really slowly to prevent it from breaking, and we have to keep it warm if we want to continue to work with it. So this glass is pretty solid right now, but it's still hovering just at about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Very healthy temperature for glass. Meanwhile, our equipment is running between 21 and 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is what we need to do to move on to the next step. We've just attached a pipe to the bottom of the piece or the end of the piece, and we'll completely break the piece off of the first pipe that it was blown on, created on. And by doing this, we're kind of flipping the orientation of the piece. So once we're ready to break the piece off, we'll apply a little bit of water. And this water will thermally shock and crack that connection. And then with just a tap of the pipe, so it'll pop right off. And after soaking up a bunch of heat, we'll be able to start working on the opposite end of the piece quite a bit more. And the idea with the top of this piece, we still have to have an opening in there so that we're not creating a vacuum. Yeah, so even though we've been cinching down like this, right on that opening, we still just have this tiny little opening that we're going to be keeping. And you can actually see this with the finished pieces as well. We have a small opening. Usually in the bottom of the piece is where we like to have a small hole drilled so you can't see it. That's where it'd be sitting on the pedestal. But for some of these pieces, we couldn't help it. Had to have a small opening in the top. I believe this one has a small opening hidden in the top, balloon-shaped one. And welcome into the Hot Shop, you two. Hi. We're just getting started on closing up the end of this bubble, or we're not completely closing it up, but we want it to look like it's closed. And this is going to eventually become the form that you see sketched on the ground in chalk right here. This was drawn by our visiting artist, Nick Mount. He's the one in the white t-shirt here at the center bench. And could we have Nick's slideshow on the screen, please? So this is a slideshow showing off some of the previous works that Nick has made and some sketches of what we might see throughout the residency, which this is the last day of the residency, I will point out. So we'll finish off what we can. And this is a residency before a residency, basically. Our visiting artist is going to be teaching a class at Pilchuck Glass School, which is about 2 hours north of us, Stanwood, Washington, for about a week and a half, I think he said. So now he'll have these forms. As he teaches the class, he can use them as examples. Thank you. I did want to point out again that we have some finished pieces right here on the front table. You're welcome to take a closer look at these. Welcome to take photos of whatever you like. And welcome into the hot shop to those who just joined in. We have a visiting artist in the hot shop today, Nick Mount, and he's the one in the white t-shirt, kind of closer to the back there. And we are specifically working on the piece that he's sketched on the floor, just to the right of where they're all working. Yeah, sketched on the floor in chalk, I should point out. And Nick has been here for a full residency, so 5 days of work. This is the last day, finishing this residency off. And on the last day of our artist residencies, we always have an artist talk. So our visiting artist will come up here to the front. He's going to talk about himself as an artist, his inspirations behind his work, and that will happen at just about 1 p.m. So eventually this little piece of glass on the top of the piece will have to be knocked off or broken off in some sort of way. It's just a little bit of excess glass. So we're very carefully cutting at it with a pair of shears, kind of weakening its connection with the rest of the piece before just knocking it off with a little tap. And for those who joined in a little bit later, I was explaining to the audience earlier how when we work on blown pieces, we can't create a vacuum. A vacuum is when a piece is completely closed off. It can cause the glass to implode on itself, basically. So we have this tiny little hole right where we broke that piece of glass off a second ago that's going to remain in the finished product. Now we still have some details we need to add to this section in particular. And by this section, I mean like this entire blown piece is the upper half of our finished piece, one of two blown pieces that'll be attached together, just like the ones on our pedestal. But we have these objects attached to the side of the piece that are supposed to represent kind of like earmuffs or headphones. We have some that have been made and set aside in the garage, this silver box right here, staying nice and warm at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, I know that temperature sounds pretty hot, but it's just warm enough to keep it from breaking. And these are some examples up here of some previous ones that they've made. The striping in them is actually coming from cane, which are these sticks of colored glass on the table right here. So our piece at the center bench, in the very beginning, we had it attached to a blowpipe on this end where we had that little hole that we were working on. And then we attached this pipe to the bottom, broke it off of the blowpipe, we're at this point now where we have a small hole that remains, but we now have the exact shape we want on that side of the bubble. So we're going to take another blowpipe with a little clear glass kind of in the shape of a crown, and we'll attach it over top of that opening that we have. So we can continue to blow air into the piece as we attach these smaller blown pieces to the side. So we brought that blowpipe over, we attached it over top of the opening, and I'll make sure to catch you guys up in just a second. This is kind of a pivotal moment for our piece, and I do have closed captioning on the screen. I know my voice gets echoey and those torches are pretty loud. So we're breaking the piece off with a little bit of water and a tap of the pipe. And now we have flipped the orientation of the piece again. And this is important because we are going to be attaching the second section of our piece to this far end that is now not attached to the pipe. And for those who just joined in, welcome into the Hot Shop. Want to catch you up on who we have here and the project that we're working on and everything that I can. So we have a visiting artist in the Hot Shop today. His name is Nick Mao. And he's the one in the white t-shirt closest to the front right here. And let's see a slideshow on the screen, please. So for those who haven't seen this yet, this slideshow on the screen is just showing off some of the previously made works of his and some drawings of what we'll see throughout the residency. Yeah, our artist residencies are usually 5 days. I would say that that's more frequent than any other length of time. And Nick's residency is specifically just before he has a residency, or, well, he'll be teaching a class specifically at Pilchuck Glass School. And that's 2 hours north of us in Stanwood, Washington. And we have a partnership with Pilchuck Glass School where we will take artists in for residencies before or after their Pilchuck residency so they can continue their line of work or prepare for some work that they're doing at Pilchuck. And Nick is an internationally renowned artist. He really helped develop the studio glass movement in Australia when he started up or established his studio with his partner Pauline in Victoria. And he started working with glass in the 70s. And our team on the floor, everyone else around him, they work for the Museum of Glass full time. They've been working with glass for about 20 to 30 years individually. So everyone on the floor is definitely considered a professional. Now, as for the piece, again, we're working on this piece that has been sketched on the floor in chalk by our visiting artist, Nick. And this is just half of the piece. This is still the first thing that we're working on today, so you guys came in at a good time, kind of halfway through the process in general. And something else really important to mention, every time we have artist residencies, on the last day of their residency, they'll give an artist talk. So at 1 p.m., our artist Nick, he'll come up here with the microphone. He'll talk about himself as an artist, his inspirations, and his artwork, of course. So we will hear from him in, looks like an hour and a half. Yeah, I just got a good question. So again, we have these example pieces down on the front table. You can see that we have one upper blown section, we have one lower blown section, which is kind of like a base to hold that upper blown section. And then we also have these objects on the side of the piece. And these are supposed to represent or kind of look like headphones or earmuffs. And we have some of these already made. They're set aside in the garage. This silver box right here sits at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit and just keeps those pieces of glass warm enough that they won't break from thermal shock. So when we work on this piece, for example, when we finish this upper half, we'll set it aside in here and just kind of keep it warm in there. It's like putting a piece on pause, and then we could just pull it back out later on and continue to work with it. So we are getting ready to attach those earmuffs or headphones. And the way that we have to do this, because those are blown pieces themselves, and this is a blown piece that we're working on right now, we want all of those bubbles interconnected. So we take this tungsten bit inside of a drill, we melt and drill a hole into the side of the piece, and then we can line up the hole in that little earmuff to the hole that we just drilled, and we'll have all of the pieces interconnected. So we'll have to do this twice, one for each of the earmuffs. And this small torch that we've been working with on and off, this little handheld one, this is the hottest item in the hot shop. I always like to point that out. I'm sure you could tell because of that bright blue flame that it's pretty warm, but it gets up to about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So now we heat up the two connection points. We've already heated up the side of our piece. Now we've just lightly heated the earmuff, and then we just push it onto the side of our piece. And this is done with some Kevlar gloves, so we can really control how deep this is pushed into the piece. Now we have to do that same thing for the other side. So with this piece right here, I think there's pretty much nothing more that we'll be doing with this other than eventually connecting it to the base. So we'll let it kind of stabilize in temperature. We want it to sit just at about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the whole thing. And since we just attached those objects to the side, it's really hot in those little sections there. So we're letting that cool down. We're heating up any other areas that are cooling too quickly maybe, which is usually where the glass is connected to the pipe, by the way. Kind of sucks heat out of the piece. And then we'll set the entire thing, we'll set the entire end of the pipe with the piece on it inside of the garage to keep it warm. Yep, so now we just set it aside to keep it warm. And we've already gotten started on the next segment. So for those who haven't seen the very beginning of the process, we didn't do this just now, but the way that we create the pattern is we take these little squares of colored glass and we lay them all out side by side on these pieces of kiln shelf. And then once we get this hot enough that they all start to kind of stick together, we take the end of our pipe and we roll it over top of basically the edge of that pattern to pick it up and create a cylinder of pattern on the end of our pipe. And then using that, yes, these tiny little squares are rich enough of a color that when we blow it out, it still maintains its shape, it still maintains its color. We can really stretch it out into these larger squares like you're seeing with these finished pieces. So we've already prepared the color. I think we prepared it yesterday, turned it into a bubble, and then we just like picked up the bubble today to work with it further. So we don't have to do as much work setting up the pattern and then heating up the pattern. And that's what we have right now on the end of our pipe is that patterned bubble that we prepared yesterday. Hey, welcome into the hot shop, you guys. I'll give an introduction as to who we have here and what we have going on. Which we have a visiting artist today. His name is Nick Mount. He's the one up in the front talking with some of the audience members. And we actually have an artist talk planned for him at 1 p.m. This is what we do on the last day of all of our visiting artist residencies, is we have the artists come to the front, they grab the mic, and they talk about their inspirations and themselves as an artist. So we'll see that at 1. And yeah, this is the last day of his residency. We have some finished pieces over the last 4 days right here on the front table. And we've already gotten started on the next one right now. We're actually a little over halfway through the process. Before you guys came in, we worked on the upper half of the piece, which has those little earmuffs or headphones on either side. And now we're working on the base of the piece that one will sit on top of. Oh, and can I have our visiting artist slideshow, please? Thank you. So I wanted to make sure you guys saw this. Up on the screen, there's a slideshow playing of our visiting artist's work. So previously made works, some sketches for the residency, just kind of giving us some ideas of what we would see made. And a lot of this work is going to be shown and used for educational purposes. Our visiting artist is going to be teaching a class for about a week and a half at Pilchuck Glass School, which is 2 hours north of us in Stanwood, Washington. So he's going to be doing a lot. He's going to be here for a week, and then he's going to be there for a week and a half. Our visiting artist has his own studio in Victoria, in Australia, and he's an internationally renowned artist. Started working with glass in the 70s. Everyone else you see on the floor down here, they work for the Museum of Glass. This is their full-time job, working here at the museum with visiting artists that come through, working on store items. We have so many different things that we do throughout the day. And they all have between 20 and 30 years of experience working with glass. Thank you. So up on the screen, we have a view of the left bench where we have that patterned cup of colored glass. And I did hear that at some point they grabbed the wrong one, so I'm not sure if this is still the wrong one. They were just preparing to put it away again, or if this is the right one and we're going to continue off of this bubble right here. But this is the very beginning of the process at the center bench. This is what we do before we even pick up any of that color. We take clear glass on the end of our pipe. We burst a bubble, quite literally. We like break the bubble open. And that means that we only have clear glass wrapped around the end of the pipe. When we blow air, it just passes all the way through. And then using that, we can pick up our pattern over top of it and create a bubble using just the patterned glass on its own. It's very complex. So now we've moved this pattern to the center bench. This is where we're going to be working for the most part. We tend to start our projects on the side benches and then work mainly at the center bench, actually shaping and blowing it out. This is where we're getting all of our glass in the first place. This tank with the closed door, this is the glass furnace, sitting at 2100 degrees Fahrenheit and holding a crucible filled with molten glass right in the base of it. So once we gathered that layer of clear, we smoothed and rounded it out, maybe expanded the bubble just a little bit, and now we're going to let it sit and cool down again. We need one more layer of clear glass, and then we can actually blow this piece out and start working with it. But we always let it cool down in between layers, so we essentially have this like solid core of glass within the next layer of clear. Yeah, this is just a pipe cooler, a trough of water that we set the pipe into, which is why you saw some steam rising. Just gives us better leverage. We can get our hands much closer to the glass. So now we're really starting to expand this bubble of glass, blowing into the end of the pipe, and we're kind of guiding which way the bubble blows out by using this pad. That pad is actually just folded up newspaper that we splashed a little bit of water. It conforms to the shape of our hand, so it's as close as we can get to using our hands to shape the glass. So what we just created is the jack line, basically a divot or a line that will squeeze in right off the end of the pipe, purposeful weak point that we'll use later on to break the piece off. And now we can finish blowing this out and sheeping it. And a lot of these bases have ended up being pretty cylindrical, so that's the shape that we can expect from this bubble right here. And now we're ready to flatten the bottom out. So we use a wooden paddle, just push it onto the bottom while keeping pressure on the side with the jacks, pushing it into a nice crisp corner. And you'll also notice kind of behind the scenes, Gabe was capping the end of the pipe, keeping his thumb over it, because air can escape the piece when we apply pressure to it. The pipe works both ways like a straw. So we're keeping that pressure inside of the piece. So this whole process where we drilled a hole in the bottom, we're attaching another blowpipe over top of that hole right now with kind of this clear glass connection like a crown so that we don't cover the hole, of course. This is going to allow us to continue to blow air into the piece even after breaking it off of this blowpipe that we're breaking it off of right now. Voila. So this now far end, the end that's furthest away from the pipe now, this is eventually going to be the top of the base that we'll set this second piece on top of. And this has to be completely closed off on this end, which is also why we have that hole drilled into the bottom. We don't want to create a vacuum in our piece. Hey, welcome into the hot shop, everyone. Yeah, we have a visiting artist, Nick Mount, in here, and he's the one who's in the white t-shirt right here at the center. And everyone else on the floor, they work for the museum. They help visiting artists that come through. A lot of them have between 20 and 30 years of experience working with glass. This is their full-time job. They come in, they help visiting artists that come through. They work on various commission pieces, store items, and personal projects, I'm sure. And we're working on the piece that is actually sketched on the floor right now. I know the chalk is getting a little bit washed away with people's walking, but this is the piece we're working on now. We already have the top half completely finished, so what you're seeing is us finishing off the base of the piece, and then we'll connect the two together. And Nick came here for a full residency, so this is the 5th and final day. He started on Wednesday. Because it's the final day of his residency, he's going to have an artist talk at about 1 p.m. So in about 45 minutes, he'll come up here, he'll take the mic, and he'll talk about his inspirations and himself as an artist, all that backstory behind his work. And just after this residency, Nick is going to be heading up to Pilchuck Glass School, which is about 2 hours north of us in Stanwood. He's going to be teaching a class in the hot shop there. So just before you guys came in, we worked on the bottom half of the base here. So what's attached to the pipe right now is actually what's going to be, set on the table as a finished product. And we're working on the top of the base where we're going to attach our upper half of the piece. Also, yeah, you guys are welcome to take a closer look at these finished pieces. We've made these over the last 4 days of the residency. And the patterning, I know, is super interesting. It all started from these tiny little squares of colored glass that we have out on the pedestal right here. And yes, they can expand that much. That color is really rich. No, they're just blown forms, so they're not open in the top necessarily. I think a couple of them as finished products will have a small opening in the top, but for the most part, they are, yeah, just like a sculptural or standalone piece. Yeah. Also, these are supposed to represent like heads with earmuffs or headphones on either side. That's the way it was described to me. And they are blown all the way through, and the bubbles are all interconnected. So this is hollow, like the base, the bottom, and the top are hollow, and the little earmuffs are hollow too, and they're all interconnected. Yeah, so the way the patterning works is pretty complex, actually. So I gave just a very general explanation when I showed you these squares, but we actually set them side by side in the pattern that we want on these trays. And then we will heat all of those squares up and kind of compress them together until they all stick together. And then we have to take our pipe with some clear glass as kind of a connection, and we roll it over top of those squares to pick up the pattern all the way around. Yeah, this is called Marini. It's a pretty complex technique, but the simplest way I could describe it is actually using something else that we already have out, which is cane, these sticks of colored glass that we have out on the table over here. So we can take glass in the hot shop, we can shape it into kind of this large square shape or box shape. We attach a second pipe to the other end, and then we stretch it out. And then when we cut it up into all these little pieces, we have the same exact color, we have the same exact size and shape for each of the squares. And so basically, the cross section of cane is Marini, or it can be used as Marini. You know, lots of names. It's all a lot of Italian techniques, Venetian techniques, which we've adopted a lot of tools, techniques, and names for things in the US off of Italian glassblowing. Yeah. So we pulled out the top half of the piece, and that's over at the left bench right now. Could we have a view of the left bench real quick, please? Thank you. So there's the top half. We pulled it out of the garage, the silver box right here. So I know it kind of seemed like it appeared out of nowhere. It was keeping warm at about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit inside of this box. There's a flame in the corner in there. So what we'll do is eventually we'll start heating up the two connection points of these two blown pieces, and then we'll just bring them together right here at the center bench. And this is why it's important to have two different places to work at in the hot shop here, two different places to heat up the glass, to work with the glass. Yeah, so this is just a little size check they always do first. Then they'll start heating up those connecting points. So we're applying a ton of extra heat using this small handheld torch, which gets up to about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, by the way. So this is going to very quickly heat up a small section of glass. And we have to do an overall heat to the entire piece as well to make sure nothing drops below 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth with these two pieces until we're ready to connect them. So now we bring the two together, first pushing in and then separating or pulling apart the pieces just a little bit. And this connection is really hot. So if we were to break one of the pipes off right now, it would start moving, flopping around like crazy. So we have to let that connection cool down while keeping other areas warm. So we'll start torching with this fluffy torch all of the remaining glass. And then to break this pipe away, leave our pieces connected, we just apply a little bit of water and then tap the pipe, and that pops right off. So we now have our pieces connected. From here, it's a little bit of light adjustments, and sometimes they'll get rid of that little bit of clear glass on the top or the end of the piece. But no matter what, these pieces are going to have to go through a cold working process, which is the grinding and polishing of the glass afterwards, because it's connected to this pipe at the bottom here. That is going to have to remain. A little bit of clear glass will be left over. So at this point, we're just getting ready to break the piece off of the pipe and put it away. So we're torching all of the areas that need a little extra heat. And we're torching that clear glass connecting the piece and the pipe. And then eventually we'll be able to apply some water, crack that connection, and pop the piece off. And I think that this finished piece is going to go inside of the annealer on the left wall. Don't know yet, but I think so. These boxes hold all of the glass at about 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Whenever we finish them, we put them in there. It just stays at that temperature. And then we press a button, and it slowly cools down for about 12 hours or so. It's a long cooling cycle, but it's required to prevent thermal shock, which happens when you cool or heat the glass too quickly. So after one final heat now, we apply some water, cracking that connection, and then a quick tap of the pipe, and that piece should pop right off into those Kevlar gloves. And let's give them a round of applause for finishing that piece. And then safely into the annealer it goes. And it stands. So that's the first piece of the day done. That's the first piece that we've put away from today. And we will see this throughout the residency, or we have seen this, where we start a piece, finish it in the first half, and then we start a piece, finish it in the second half of the day as well. And again, we'll have our artist talk at 1 p.m. So please return for that. You can ask our artist as many questions as you like about his inspirations and himself as an artist.
Thank you.
And since we still have a half hour till the artist talk, I'm assuming that we'll see a little bit of prep work for the next piece that we'll see in the second half of the day. Hey, welcome into the Hot Shop, you guys. I just wanted to introduce what we see right now happening on the Hot Shop floor, which we're doing a little bit of prep work for our next project, which we'll see after our lunch. We are most likely making some of these little pieces like you see here on the front pedestal. These will eventually be assembled onto pieces like these on the front table. These have been made over the past 4 days or so, designed by our visiting artist. His name's Nick Mount, and he's the one who's in the white t-shirt over on the far left. He's walking around. I was just chatting with him a moment ago at the center bench. But yeah, we have had him here for a full residency, kind of in partnership with Pilchuck Glass School. He's going to be going there pretty soon here and teaching a class for a week and a half for some students. And you'll use these as basically example pieces. And just at about 1 p.m., we will be having an artist talk. So Nick will come up here himself. He'll take the mic and he'll talk about his inspirations and himself as an artist, like his history, and maybe learn a little bit more about this work. But yeah, we're just doing a little bit of prep work. These pieces that I pointed out, they are actually blown. They're hollow all the way through. And so are the finished pieces. Everything is blown. Everything's kind of interconnected, so air travels through the whole thing. A lot of our equipment's running between 21 and 2300 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, pretty warm. Yeah, the glass at that temperature is the texture of honey. So usually what you'll see us doing is we'll already have glass on the end of our pipes that we've been working with, like we have now. We'll reheat it to a certain extent inside of the furnace, just kind of make it malleable, kind of like a taffy or a putty, and then we can blow it out further and shape it. We never really bring it back up to that completely molten temperature, otherwise it would be uncontrollable. Yeah, feel free to sit wherever you like, guys, because we are going to have an artist lecture pretty soon. Assuming in about 10 minutes or so, we'll have our artist lecture. And our visiting artist, Nick Mount, he's going to come up here to the front, take the mic from me, and talk about the work that we're seeing today. And for those who just joined in, yeah, welcome into the Hot Shop. I want to give you an idea of what we've been seeing today and what we'll see in the second half of the day. So take a glance at these pieces right here on the front table. These were all made over the last 4 days of our visiting artist residency right here. These are all individual blown pieces of glass, even the little earmuff sort of pieces on the sides of these heads. They're all interconnected air-wise and just physically connected to each other. Oh, and look at this. It looks like we've set up our next pattern. So this is how we start the checkerboard pattern. These tiny little squares of colored glass, which are in these bags here. We lay them out in that checkerboard pattern, and then we eventually roll them up on the end of a pipe to pick them up and start working with them further. But yeah, right now over on the left bench, we're just doing a little bit of prep work for our next piece, which is mostly consisting of blowing these little glass balls that will be attached to the sides of the head. So over on that left bench, you can kind of just barely see this on the corner of the screen. We have a bubble of glass already on the end of our pipe. And when he starts turning slower, you can see this really interesting pattern on the surface of the bubble of striping, just like you see with all the finished pieces as well. And this is coming from something called cane. Luckily, we have plenty of these. Wow, my mic just cut out. Luckily, we have plenty of these examples over here. Just these short sticks of colored glass. Let me change the batteries on my mic. Now there's very little blowing needed for these small pieces of glass. It happens really quickly. We expanded this bubble just a little bit further, and then we started with the jacks, which are those two metal blades. These we use throughout the entire process, almost no matter what piece we're making, sculptural, blown, small, big. We have to create a breaking point to take the piece off of the pipe, which is why we cinch down with those blades pretty hard, like we're doing right now. And could I actually have our artist slideshow on the screen, please? Thank you. So I wanted to make sure you guys had a chance to see this. I think we will be showing this off during the artist lecture or some similar things, but this slideshow includes some pieces that Nick has made in the past, as well as some sketches for the pieces that are made during the residency, kind of some inspiration photos, kind of give you an idea of what we're seeing in the hot shop. And again, feel free to take a closer look at these finished pieces. People have come down into the front throughout the day today, and they've taken pictures of these pieces, taken a closer look. You're totally welcome to. All right, it's about that time. So we're going to have someone introduce our visiting artist, and then our visiting artist will hop on the mic himself, and we'll have our artist talk.
Are we ready? Yes, hello everybody. Thank you so much for being here on this beautiful day. I'm Susan, I'm Curator of Education here, and I have the pleasure of often introducing the Artist Lecture here. And we're especially pleased to have Nick Mount back with us again. Yay! All the way from Australia. And I have to tell you that his residency is part of our Fuel Their Fire program, where people can sponsor a residency and you actually get to get a piece from the residency. So if you're interested in any of the lineups, please let me know. Nick's residency is sponsored by our friends Phyllis Griggs and Laylee Warehouser. And Phyllis and Laylee, if you're watching, thank you so much. And Nick is here as part of our collaboration, which is an annual one, with the Pilchuck Summer Glass Series, the Pilchuck Glass School. So I have to tell you that Nick was in our exhibition in 2013, Links Australian Glass and the Pacific Northwest, which shows you we've done a whole exhibition on our collaboration with Australia, which is deep and profound, and it's very special. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Nick. So in the traditions of Studio Glass, the Studio Glass movement, Nick is an advocate for communal training and production. He has a reputation for being a generous mentor and regularly collaborates with teams of highly skilled glassblowers, such as our team here this week. In a career spanning 50 years, Nick has made a significant contribution to the development of studio glass as an artistic medium in Australia and is celebrated as a master of his craft, which you certainly are. So we are very happy to have Nick here, and I'm going to pass the mic so he can tell you about his work himself. Nick.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the generous words. Yeah, so thanks for coming along. It is great to be here. It's a great privilege, of course, for any of the glass people to come and work here for a week, and also a great privilege to be sponsored in this. It costs a bomb to keep the whole thing going, and you know, any of us that come to work here are very lucky, I think. That's my name, Old Lucky. But so I've got a bunch of slides that I put together, Pauline and I put together. It's just a sort of a short series. I don't know who's going to click them through, but or if somebody does click them through for me. Right. There. So what do I click? Anything? Anyway, while we figure that out, normally with a presentation like this, people like to talk about themselves, say how good they are, and okay, and we'll go through a series of slides or images that describe a sort of chronological progression of their work and themselves. I don't like to do that because I'm a contrary old person. Normally at the end of the slideshow, the presenter opens it up for questions. I like to open it up for questions first, early, and while I click through the slides, I'll answer questions, if there are any. And at least in doing that, I know that I'm talking to one person who might be interested in what I'm saying. So if anybody's got any questions at all, Tala, just call it out and let me know what the question is, because I'm keen to talk to people rather than just, you know, rave on. Any questions?
What caught your eye about glassblowing?
About glassblowing? What got me going is, well, here we are, 1974. Pauline and I got married in 1974, and we were going to art school in Gippsland, which is in the southeastern corner of Australia. And this guy, Dick Marquis, came, he was living in California at the time. He came to our school and demonstrated glassblowing. And it was really basic and earthy, and his job was to come into different schools around our state and set up a glassblowing studio in a week and then blow some glass for a week and then go on to another school. And we'd never seen glass blowing before. It wasn't really a thing in Australia then, 1974. And there were a couple of people dabbling, but I really liked the look of Dick and Rafi. And Pauline and I, for our school and accreditation for the school, we got to travel with Dick and Rafi around southeastern Australia, help him set up, build the studios, start blowing glass, and hang out with a guy who was a cowboy. And I've always loved cowboys. So for some of the trip around, we had this mobile glass blowing studio, which was a pile of bricks on the back of a trailer. We'd hook it up to the car and we'd go around to the different schools. And it was great, a real experience that we hadn't had before, you know, groups of people, craftspeople, making stuff that was really exciting. These are some of the things that we made out of the back of the trailer, using all Kugler colours and Marinis that he'd brought from California with him, sticking them together, and we used glass that came from a factory that did insulation glass. And it was just insulation glass crushed up, and we chucked it into the furnace and melted it down, and we're able to make these magical things in no time at all, really. 2 weeks in a place and then move on. Doesn't make any sense now, but it didn't make any sense then, but I really enjoyed it. So after that, Pauline and I came back to California with Dick, and we started working around small studios around California and had fun, even more fun, in Benicia and other places, in Berkeley and all around. But that was my introduction to glass blowing. And then we came back to Australia and set up our own studio with a couple of mates and started blowing glass. And so that was me in the cowboy hat, because I've always loved cowboys. But, and I've always worn a onesie to work in. That was 1976. But it's gone on from there, really. You know, it developed. Well, really, what I made was what I could make. And my skills weren't very high. Obviously, I hadn't had any training or formal education in glass. I didn't really know what I was doing, but we started making things that we could make and that we could put into craft shops and sell. So after a couple of years, we were making these kind of things and those kind of things and these kind of things, and build up a body of skills over a period of time. All that time too, we had been coming back to America once or twice a year to work in the studios wherever we could get a job, to experience different kinds of studios, different kind of making, different kind of makers, and to gather up as much as we possibly could from those studios, and all the things that we'd seen and done, and take them back like in a big package over your shoulder, trudge back to Australia and empty it all out in the studio and make what you could of it. That's what we did. And Tala, what's up?
Why do you love production so much?
Well, I'm that kind of guy. I like to make, I like to think that I know who I am through my hand skills. And to develop a body of skills or a group of skills through working with your hands is, to me, a really important thing. To develop skills is a matter of repetition, getting to learn your material and learn your process and learn how to push it forward or move it sideways or move around. And with a material like glass, which is magical and mystical, and you really don't know, where it comes from or how it works, the only way to learn it is by digging in and doing it. You can't book learn it. I'm not a book learning type of guy. And so to dive into the furnace and wallow around in the material is the only way that I've been able to learn it. And so production glass blowing is like that. You do the same thing over and over and over again. You learn how to understand the material, or get close to it anyway. I don't think you ever get to a point where you're really friendly with the material. You get to a point where you're like any relationship, you're tolerated and you tolerate in return. So, yeah.
So back then, how different was like everyone's techniques in different studios that you visited? How different did they become?
Yeah, well, it moves on with your influences, you know, and coming here and seeing Lino work, or working with Dick Marquis and moving with him, and then seeing the production studios in California, and then going to the different places like Pittsburgh and Pilchuck and all over the place, and then seeing Swedish glassworkers in Sweden and Italian glassworkers in Italy. You try to, you know, take it all in. But one of the purposes, I think, that we had in our practice was to pick up this stuff and take it home, like I said before, and empty it into our own studio, and then try to make something that was recognizable as my work. That is the goal, you know. It's like for an artist or a maker to somehow, if you possibly can, to make something that somebody else might look at and say, oh, that's a Nick Mount piece. And so it's important for technical development to take whatever you can from wherever you can, and then to massage it a bit, to add the salt and pepper, which is the third component of any good craft. The first component is the material and understanding the material and the integrity of the material and the knowledge and being able to sort of get an idea of what the material is. The second component is the process and learning the process and having an understanding of the history of it, where it came from, and working it in with the tools and your hand tools. And the third component is yourself as an individual to whack it in there somehow or another, to sprinkle it in, you know, and make it a little bit different. And, you know, we made a lot of different works, and from time to time our influences were very different. These are photographs exposed directly onto the surface of figurative works, where the glass is blown into an open wire matrix and forms a sort of figurative work, and then presented like a formal figurative sculpture, the Venus of Willendorf or whatever. And then a series like this, scent bottles, which I've worked on for a long time, and I still work on this as a motif, which is informed by the traditions of glass, right from the early Egyptian, 1300 BC, making small vessels in the desert, you know, out there in Sankor Desert. There's always been some sort of a vessel that would indicate very clearly the technical skills, the cultural norms, the aesthetic preferences, the functionality. Has always been one of those vessels. And as glass was developed in Egypt and then travelled across the southern Mediterranean up through the east, and they developed glass blowing with a blowpipe at 100 years AD, and then across the top of the Mediterranean, spread out through the countries up through Europe, up through to the Nordic countries. At any one of those stages, you could say, and historians, educated people do, pick up a small vessel and they say, well, that might be Syrian, this type of date, and it was, and it indicates who the people were, what they used it for, how good they were with the glass, what kind of influences they had, and you can track that trajectory. So for a long time I've been making these bottles that I call scent bottles, because rather than carry the a perfume, they carry the scent of the maker and the culture. So a lot of them involve plumb bobs and other objects from different areas of interest of mine, and I push the material as hard as I can. I love the photos, you know. The photos more important than the work, yeah?
So that like recognizable thing you were talking about, like how long were you into glass before you like found like your thing that made you recognize?
Yeah, I'm still looking. Some people call me a pioneer of Australian glass, but that's totally wrong, because pioneers are the people that did their good work a long time ago. I'm still looking forward to doing something decent in the future. These are all, you know, everything I make really is called a scent bottle, but then they're influenced in different ways. Like a can, I think, is a really great motif, and I use that a lot. I use fruits and vegetables a lot, because in our garden, with our expanding family and with our knowledge and influence by and through the people that we live with, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's really important. If you have little kids and then they grow up and then you get grandchildren, all that kind of stuff I shovel into my work and try to work it out the best I can. So one day I might, you know, stumble across what I am. In the meantime, I'm keeping on going. This is a series that we made in Japan, in a residence in Japan. And so Pauline and I went there and we decided to start the process. We needed something to start thinking about. Moving into a different culture, a different school, different studio. We didn't know who was going to be there to help or whatever. And so we chose the colour indigo to start thinking. And indigo is a really great colour, I reckon. You know, there's indigos from different cultures all around the world. It's workwear, it's proper craftspersons, you know, clothes. It's tough, it's natural, it's formed by the reduction of natural material, organics onto cloth and with sunshine. And so it was a great place to start. But we ended up here with a group of shapes that were not Fuji-san. They're the opposite to Mount Fuji, and with chopsticks and wheels and fishing rods and floats and all that kind of influence of that particular time, a few months in Japan, rolled up into those works. And the texture on the surface of these pieces is a low-fire glass enamel that's been airbrushed on and then sgraffitoed away to give that sort of texture of the material and the hand-worked Japanese fabric. So that's what I mean about taking stuff from other cultures and implanting it into our own culture in Australia, if possible, without being plagiaristic or anything. So a lot of the work we do is driven by the market as well, you know. And for years we were working into an American arts and crafts market, and which wouldn't really fly at all in Australia. So these pieces are big, you know. Well, they're not huge. They're 5 feet wide and 3 feet tall, and made to fit in a big American domestic environment. So that would not sell at all in Sweden, let's say, or England, and not much in Australia. You can see the different influences here from the way that I value handwork and craft. These pieces are plumb bobs, which is the starting point for a lot of projects. Finding an exact point below a point, finding vertical, from there getting horizontal, from there working, you know, to create a road or a building or a pyramid or whatever you're creating. It starts at a point And the plumb bob is a perfect point. And it's a tool that doesn't fail. You can't make a mistake with it, even if you're blind or impaired some way or another. You just have to hold the piece of string and the weight points directly towards the center of the earth. And it's impossible to make a mistake with that. But the object itself is always interesting and combines materials and a shape and fine engineering and balance. But it doesn't work at all unless it's connected to a piece of string. And so the piece of string is more important than the weight. And in these pieces, I'm trying to, flesh that out. But it's all very selfish because I'm a selfish guy. And it's just all about me, basically. These fruit pieces are fruits from the future or the past or some other environment, a different climate or culture or planet. And the fruit that our children know mostly came in a can. And so a can of fruit is something that I work with as well. Fruits presented as cans. Dented cans. Because a dented can is the one that's fallen off the shelf in the supermarket and it's got no value. But it's a much, much more beautiful object. These are smaller pieces, very intimate, still working with pushing the materials, pushing the process, pushing the understanding, involving myself with those kind of things, those crafting concerns that I think are important, but creating small, intimate objects, domestic scale objects that are useless, but, they make sort of sense to me. From time to time, there are occasions, of course, that push you off course, and you need a beacon to come back to. And so beacons are important to me as well. Lighthouses, the marking of a point of time and space. More plumb bobs. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. What market? Well, like I mentioned before, I'm a selfish guy, and I am old enough to absolutely just please myself. And so it's me. I go into the hot shop and I make bits and pieces that I think are interesting because of their technique and the size and shape, and try to push myself in the hot shop. But with those objects, I take them home from the hot shop into my other studios. I cold work them, I cut them, polish, grind, work the surface so that I feel to a point where they're satisfactory objects, beautifully crafted, addressed in every part of their making and finishing. And then I have those in my studio, hundreds of them, and like as if I was a sculptor with steel going into a junkyard and picking up found objects that are interesting and composing them together in some sort of a composition that tells a narrative. That's what I do in my studio at home. I follow my own self. I do commissions and work for other people, and a lot of the time I do what I'm told, but most of the time I'm fortunate enough to be super selfish and self-indulgent. So it's not really, if I sell something like this, I'm really happy. These kind of compositions I really love. Objects that are, blown with traditional Italian techniques that are really luscious, really generous, really, you know, meaningful for me as objects in their own right, but then put together as if they're a still life and presented in a format that causes them to be available, aesthetically available as a still life in those traditional meaning of the word, a painting with a bit of fruit, a dead rabbit, some towel, you know, some tablecloth and some texture. And that, you know, I spend a lot of my time doing this kind of stuff. An aubergine and a scent bottle, or a plum bob, a fruit plum bob in a geometric frame. And making the frames I enjoy. The bronze stem I really love. It's crafting that offers, the material offers itself in a different way. This is one of Pauline's favourite pieces. I'm not too sure why, but that's Granulari Zanfirico, the oak base, charred oak base, the stem, the carefully worked and polished stem, and then the frame, the patinated bronze stamp frame, comes together like a proper object composition. And in that case, the narrative, you know, is mine to begin with, but then you put it on somebody else's pedestal and the narrative is theirs, out of my hands. Mobile pieces I really like working on. This is a hanging, a suspended form, measuring. These are more figurative, families and relationships between people, and more suspended work. It's a plum bob in a box or not. Forms that where the compositions are tightly associated, one form with another, and held in place physically with the geometry of the whole thing. Same here, two forms that sit tightly together and seem like, and in some cases actually are influenced one to another in their making. A composition with light in it, and this one too. A lit composition. More plum bobs. It's a recurring thing. It just happens all the time to me. That elemental object that is so important in the knowledge of crafting and engineering. And these suspended series is just one series that I've been working on recently, and these are the most recent works. They're figurative forms. They're called ramblers, like people walking through the bush, just talking to each other, enjoying, you know, their environment, and one's carrying a backpack even. But they're just compositions that have come, like in the way that I described before, with objects that are finished as separate pieces in the studio. Yeah. I do. And I think, you know, if you look around at people's work, craftspeople's work, and some of our friends are so obvious in this way, if the work resembles the maker, I think it's really successful. You know, like Tom Moore, for instance, he is his work. He lives his work. He exists as his work. And his work is really retains that integrity. And I think, yeah, I'm made up of geometric parts that come together but are not always that well balanced. The engineering's off. Well, that's it from me, unless as anybody else. Good one. And again, thanks very much for having me here in Tacoma. It's a real privilege and a real joy. The people that we get to work with here are incredible. The environment's fabulous. And the weather, amazing today.